First of all, welcome, and thank you all for joining us tonight for another talk in our series, Conversations with the Past, which actually this series has been running for a full year as of tomorrow. So it's very exciting for us. So I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Frieda Toth. Frieda is arguably the foremost expert on the Spy Who Loved Me, having lived in Spy Who Loved Me country for most of her life and researching the book for over 10 years. She recently recreated the scooter journey of the novel's heroine, Viv Michelle, from the Canadian border to the Adirondacks, and a book about that adventure is forthcoming in 2023. Oh, wow. Frieda is a regular presenter at SAMLA and a librarian of 25 years. Like Ian Fleming, she speaks several languages, loves to scuba dive, and enjoys good cooking. Her Twitter is at 3 actives, 007 in the Adirondacks, right? Yep. So please join me in welcoming Frieda for her talk, James Bond, Route 9, and me.
SAMLA, it's South Atlantic Modern Language Association. Okay. So it's a conference which we think it was just about speaking different languages, but it's historical interpretation of those things. So there's always the James Bond elements. And I presented at SAMLA 3 years running. And the most women James Bond experts I've ever seen in my life were there. So the two of us got a picture. Yeah. So, has anybody here actually read the source material of The Spy Who Loved Me? It's okay if you didn't. I know you're going to be the one. It's really, really different from the movie. The movie was a James Bond movie and nothing to do with the book. Backing up on Ian Fleming, born in 1908 to a wealthy family. His father was good friends with Winston Churchill, that when Val Fleming died, Churchill wrote his obituary. That's the kind of family he had. Ian's family had, I think, 24 servants when he was growing up. One of them, I cannot believe she did not get a James Bond book. One of the nursemaids was named Rose Goodchild. I'm sorry, that was a lost opportunity. Yeah. But maybe just that kind of poetic name kind of got his branding with it. So he was the screw-up child. He was the second child of 4 boys. And his older brother Peter was the handsome. And his older brother Peter was the smart one. And if anybody has a sibling who's the smart one, and the good one, and the handsome one, the only choice is for you to be the family screw up. That's all there is. He was the kind of kid who, if he didn't like what he was eating, he would throw his oatmeal behind the equivalent of a radiator. And he probably wasn't going to get in trouble for it because the family thought he was kind of cute. He was his father's favorite. His father called him Johnny, which of course Ian is a form of John. And his father died in World War I, leaving his mother with 4 boys, lots of money, and not wanting to let go of this money. So the father, Valentine, had made it so that it was up to her whether she ever gave any money to her sons. Well, now, Peter handled it by becoming a successful travel writer, marrying a wealthy actor named Cecily or Cecile Johnson. Was it Cecile? Anyway, she was making $2,000 a picture in the 1920s. So really, Peter didn't need Bond's money anymore. But Ian, who had gotten used to a certain lifestyle, spent his entire life in the pursuit of more money. It shaped everything he did. He always felt insecure, and he would own 2, maybe 3 houses, and he would still write letters to his mother saying, "Oh, we just can't make ends meet." You ever watch those Agatha Christie movies where everybody's like walking around in their fabulous outfits, saying, "Oh, we have happiness. Ian in that situation. So Ian went to Eton, where Peter was, and was not as smart as Peter, so he became the family athlete. He became Victor Ladorum, champion of the games, 2 years running. Except maybe he didn't, because some accounts say that he missed becoming champion by 15 minutes because he was late for the game because he was getting literally his ass whipped for something he did. And then he went to the games anyway with blood running down his legs because he wanted to make a statement to everybody that was there about how awful and terrible the administration was where he was. I think he sent a message. He didn't do well at Eton. His mother put him in Sandhurst, and he got asked to leave Sandhurst too. Okay. Why do you think Ian Fleming got asked to leave Sandhurst?
Colonizing?
Could be. He did lots of things wrong when he was in Sandhurst. I don't think he was actually kicked out for this particular thing, but he and his best friend Ivor Bryce got a hold of a motorcycle, and of course nobody was supposed to have a motorcycle, and they got caught. Actually, they did not get kicked out for that one. I remember the professor, the next time he saw Ian, said, "Oh, you did a better job than usual on your last paper, Fleming." And that was about it. But he did not graduate from Sandhurst, and the womanizing thing started early. He asked somebody to go on a date with him, and she already had a date. She was a well-bred young lady, and she said, "I cannot break my date to go out with you, Ian." And he said, "No, no, no, you gotta go out with me." Didn't you hear me? Well, he was so angry that he got turned down that he said, "Well, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna go out and find the cheapest, bad word, worst word that I can." And he did. And a couple days later, he had to talk to his mom. Imagine being Ian Fleming and you have to talk to your mother because you picked up a venereal disease. Oh boy. He was still a teenager and he had to talk to his, I mean, it would be hard for anybody, but imagine being a teenage boy with the golden older sibling. Now I'm telling you all this because anyone who's actually read an Ian Fleming book or seen some of the movies would go, "Yep, that tracks. That totally would happen for who he is." And when I was telling a group of listeners at Weowaka about the thing where he demanded the girl break the date and she didn't break the date, and this wonderful woman, like 80 years old, said, "Well, he sure showed her." So the next thing was mom tried to get him in the foreign service. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. So she sent him to a place at Fitzboyle where he could learn 4 languages. He picked up the 4 languages very well. And he found that he really, really loved to ski. So his life was looking up. There was finally somebody in his life, which was the headmaster's wife, who was really interested in Ian Fleming as a person and, as it turns out, as a writer. And she encouraged him very much in his writing. And by this time, he's an older teenager. He's not, he's not a little kid. He's not a really grown up. He's an older teenager. She was encouraged his writing. She encouraged all his hobbies. As far as skiing, he was considered to be good but wild, not skilled. I'm like, yeah, okay. Suddenly, this. Whoa, everything makes sense. This is definitely the way that you would lead to Ian Fleming. He didn't pass the exam to get in the foreign service. And the reason I find this really interesting is that toward the end of his life, when he already had so much success with the James Bond books, somebody asked him, "Why weren't you in the foreign service?" And he said, "Well, I passed 5th, or no, I passed 7th, and there were only 5 vacancies," something like that. But it turns out that he didn't even really pass. And by this time, he was so rich and so famous, he could have gone, so went to the foreign service, I made my life much better than everyone. He was still insecure, so he fibbed and said that he could have gotten in, but he just didn't. Whoa. But he did become a reporter. He became a newspaper reporter for Reuters, and he was sent traveling, and his languages helped him out. He, by this time, was pretty good in French, no, excellent in French, pretty good in German, albeit with an Austrian accent, which, and he knew some Russian. Well, pretty soon World War II was happening, and I love to look at his travel documents, because in his travel documents, he would always say that he spoke French, but he'd never admit to knowing German, which I would not either admit to knowing German if I were traveling in World War II. And through a long, complicated process of knowing the right people, Ian Fleming ended up kind of sort of really being a spy. He was commander in the British Naval Reserve, and he was following, I can never get the bills right. Can you help me out, Al? The Bills, Bill Stevenson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
Bill Stevenson.
Yeah.
And he helped in the war effort, basically by being a strategizer. So he didn't do the things you think of James Bond doing, like leaping from building to building. But he did strategize ideas, and he did a lot of, hi, I'm Ian Fleming with the Eton accent. Won't you give your support behind this thing? So he did help in the war effort. He was a spy, kind of. But just like later on, he said he passed for the Foreign Service, but he didn't really. Toward the end of his life, he would let people think that he did more spying than he actually did. I think a publisher once gave him a golden gun, and he said, oh, it was for special services. Not that kind of special services, that's who we've always was. Anyway, so, oh, well, by the way, I forgot to tell you, one of the interesting things about his time as a sort of spy was that one of the people he was partnered with as a sort of spy was Roald Dahl.
Okay.
And they were in America, they were in DC, and they would go around, basically their spy mission was to be handsome men that people wanted to tell things to. And there's a great deal of power in being an attractive person that people want to be near. And Roald Dahl and Ian Fleming were very good at that. And they would charm married women, and they would charm the wives of people that wanted to talk to them. And it was a very effective way to get things done. So it's so interesting, because later in life, of course, Ian Fleming wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and the screenplay for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was written by Roald Dahl. Small world. So anyway, he was always who he was. He was very consistently who he was. He didn't really want to get married. He finally got married when he was, he was 40 something. He was really, old for marriage, especially in England, because his girlfriend was pregnant. His girlfriend was pregnant, and he got married, and this was her third marriage. So it wasn't like he had to save her reputation, but he did the right thing and got married, and then went on his honeymoon to his place in Jamaica. Now, I suppose that Ian Fleming probably spent some of his time feeling sorry for himself because Peter was a handsome one and stuff like that. But let me tell you, Ian Fleming movies take place in Jamaica so often. Well, it's because, of course, Ian Fleming spent a lot of time in Jamaica, and like a lot of good writers, right, which he set his scenes there because he knew it, he understood it. And the reason he owned property in Jamaica was when he wanted property in Jamaica and he didn't have any money for it, he contacted an ex-girlfriend. And she was so charmed that she gave him the money. Whoa. Then when he got a job at a newspaper at the Sunday Times, he was able to negotiate 2 months off a year, which he spent writing. Now, I love to bring this up because most of us who are artistic, interesting people get mad at ourselves for not getting enough done. Well, if your ex paid for your vacation spot in Jamaica and your boss gave you 2 months off a year to write, and you had a full staff, maybe you get a little bit more done than you do. Under the circumstances, it would have been a miracle if he didn't get anything done. So we got married, and the first thing he did after he got married, he had his honeymoon in Jamaica. The wedding cake was believed to be terrible. So terrible that they buried it in the backyard when the cook wasn't looking. And he sat down at his typewriter, and legend says he just pretty much did Casino Royale in one, not in one sitting, but he didn't go back and edit, he didn't go back and move chapters. He just went, okay, this is what we're doing, and got to the end. I don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think that's another time Ian Fleming's trying to be in control of his legend, but it sounds good. And it did give him an idea where, okay, if I have these 2 months, I can write a book. And he pretty much kept on a schedule. And just to put it in perspective, there's something called NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is coming up in November. If you're all creative, you should try it. It's a challenge to write an entire book in a month. And a lot of people meet that challenge. So Ian Fleming's writing a book in 2 months. You know, it's impossible. Casino Royale, by the way, I am informed reliably is pronounced Casino Royale, not Casino Royale. And that Ian and his publisher had an argument about whether to put an E on the end, and he said, I don't want the E on the end because the Americans will pronounce it Royale. So we all know how that went down. Anyway, because he was in America during World War II, and he spent time in Washington, D.C., and he spent time in New York City, and he spent time in Montreal, he would come down Route 9. Now, I have not figured out exactly how often he came down Route 9. But Route 9 was the way to get from Canada to New York City at the time. There wasn't any Northway. And the Northway didn't happen until much later. And what had happened by the time he got to The Spy Who Loved Me was his formula of bookmaking was getting tiring to him. It was charismatic bad guy in exotic locale. James Bond has to thwart the charismatic bad guy. By this time, even his publisher thought it was wearing thin. So the word is that the publisher said, can you do it the other way? Can you do it from the other? Can you do it from the Bond girl's point of view instead of from James's point of view? So The Spy Who Loved Me is the only James Bond book that is not third person past. James Bond did this, James Bond did that. It's a first person account supposedly of the woman who was in it. Let's see, where's my
Here, they're right here.
No, wait, I forgot. I think the first edition here. She got all rare books, okay? So this is the first American hardcover edition of The Spy Who Loved Me. It's got beautiful paper. It's not an expensive edition. I have to emphasize that. It's rare but not expensive. In the first edition, it says, to my readers, actually, I should probably try that. I found what you followed lying on my desk one morning. As you will see, it appears to be the first person story of a young woman, evidently beautiful and not unskilled in the arts of love. So Ian Fleming was pretending that this was the diary of the person who was telling the story. If anybody is familiar with Peter Chigley, P.D.Q. Bach. Okay, all right. So he puts his tongue in his cheek, but he pretends that P.D.Q. Bach is a real person. So for a long time, Ian Fleming was pretending that James Bond was a real person and he was just writing his story. So in this one, he was pretending that this woman was real. Now, I read this when I was 17. I'm like, yeah. Good story, bro. However, by the time I had read this one, I had read maybe 5 James Bond books, and I was used to being, okay, you know, we're going to be in Istanbul, we're going to be in Paris, and then, you know, ski chases are coming. I want you to imagine being 17 years old First love. First love is the one who introduced me to Bob. Getting all these books because I want to get away. And this is what I read. I was running away. I was running away from England, from my childhood, from the winter, from a sequence of untidy, unattractive love affairs, from the few sticks of furniture and jumble of overworn clothes that my London life had corrected around me. And I had run a very long way indeed. Almost, exaggerating a bit, halfway around the world. In fact, I had come all the way from London to the Dreaming Pines motor court. Near Lake George. That famous American tourist resort in the Adirondacks, that vast expanse of mountains, lakes, and pine forests, which forms most of the Northern Territory of New York State. I had started on September the 1st, and it was now Friday the 13th. Folks, here you are, one day apart from Spider Lonely Day, which tomorrow is the 13th. I was so shocked I closed the book. And I opened up again. Yep, it's really in Lake George. And at the time I was living in Lake George, so I'm sitting there like, that's not what I read a James Bond book for. I couldn't believe it. And I went on to read the book. And I'll get to the plot in a bit, but let me get you some of the parts that were telling me that Ian Fleming had actually been in the Glens Falls area. Is anybody here at Glens Falls native? No, yes,
I had to be the one, right?
Oh. And I got a treat for you when we get here. All right, so I've lived here all of my life, but I'm nearly 60 years old. And all my life, my mommy told me what street not to walk on.
South Street.
Yes, the street of dreams. So Viv finds a job at an Adirondack motel, the Dreaming Pines motor court. And the people who she's answering to, the wife who Ian Fleming named after one of his exes, because of course he did. The wife is kind of not very nice, and the man is always trying to sexually assault her, and she's always putting a chair underneath her doorknob and everything like that. And we tolerated that a lot more than we have to now. Like, and then even when I was in high school in the 80s, there were a lot more tolerance for sexual assault. We didn't even use the word. Anyway, so they're leaving, and he tries again to put his hands all over this poor young woman. And the wife says, "Come on, Jed. You can work off those urges on West Street tonight." Oh. It turns out, because I thought they were just disguising it, because as you were saying, you know, the person takes the place but changes it just a little bit. I thought that he was substituting West Street for South Street. I couldn't bear not to know for sure. So I went to the Folk Life Center in the basement of Kendall Public Library, and I said to the archivist, "Can you please look up West Street in 1960? And she very gaily said, "Sure." And it turns out that what is now Broad Street was at the time of this being researched called West Street. Of course, West and South would intersect. And yes, you could pick up Lady of the Evening in 1960 on West Street. This is one of the things I absolutely love to bring up, because when some of the greatest James Bond experts in the world, most of the greatest James Bond experts in the world live in London, have never been here. I just want to point that out. Some of them have said, "Oh, you know, Ian Fleming did the whole thing from London. He didn't research it. He was never in upstate New York." And then one of my friends who lives in California said, "Well, you know, he might have been in New York State, but you can pick up a lot from SO maps. You can pick up a lot from literature. Like, you don't know where South Street is unless you're here or you got a friend." Because you do not put where to pick up a lady of the evening in the telephone book. It's not happening. So when I was just reading the book, that didn't. I mean, it made me convinced that Ian Fleming had been here, but I wasn't thinking about that as something that was really important. It wasn't something that I would be talking about. But time went on. All right, where were we? I asked. So she's there for 2 weeks, and she says, she has a terrible love affair, and then she has another terrible love affair. And this is, she's Canadian, and she was sent to Europe for finishing school. She has these terrible love affairs, so she decides she's gonna take all the money she saved up, buy a Vespa, go back to her aunt in Montreal, and just drive south for a long time. Now, she had gotten a career as a newspaper editor, so she was pretty sure she would find work, which is one of the things I love about Ian Fleming. His heroines always are self-supporting, or at least usually self-supporting. So she was gonna have work. She was just gonna drive away south. So it took her 2 weeks to get from Montreal to Lake George. And if you've ever driven Route 9, there's no reason for this to take 2 weeks.
She must have stopped though.
She did stop, and yeah, I'll explain that in a bit. It was at the end of these 2 weeks that I found myself at Lake George. That dreadful hub of tourism in the Adirondacks that has somehow managed to turn history and forests and wildlife into honky tonk. I know, right? You're hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
Apart from the rather imposing stockade fort and the harmless steamers that fly up to Fort Ticonderoga and back, the rest is a gimcrack nightmare of concrete gnomes, Bambi deer and toadstools, shoddy food stalls, selling Big Chief hamburgers and mini ha-ha candy floss, and attractions such as Animal Land. Visitors may hold and photograph costumes chimps. Gaslight Village, genuine 1890s gaslighting, and Storytown, USA. This is my favorite. A terrifying Babyland nightmare, which I need not describe. It was here that I fled away from the horrible mainstream that Route 9 had become, and took to the dusty side road through the forest that was to lead me to Dreamy Pines Motor Court. In other words, she was going down Route 9, which was at the time was the main route, and then she took the next turn off onto the side road, which would of course be Bay Road. So what she did, she took a turn right after Route 9. So let's see, where are we going? North, south? We're going south. Okay. So we're going south on Route 9. She's at Storytown, USA. She takes the next turn off. There isn't any turn off right, there's only turn off left, which is Round Pond Road. So Round Pond Road snakes around until it gets to the pond, and is that point, and that is the only point that there is a pond on the left. Every other pond on Route 9, which is on Route 9, is on the right. Round Pond, as you twist around there, is the only one that's on the left.
So that's the Glen Falls Country Club.
That's what I was thinking, that's good.
It's Paradise Beach, And
Okay, yeah,
yeah, so
okay.
it's
Glen Falls Country Club, right?
so well, the Glen Falls Country Club would have been like
That would have been
Paradise.
Yeah,
This is beach. So, but this the pond like goes this far out. So Paradise Beach is a little bit southeast
Okay.
on Round
Yeah.
Pond Road of Country Club. So you pass the Country Club and you keep going, and that is what you see.
When you're at the beach, you'll be able to see across and you can see it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I remember if it were still Paradise Beach, it would be a lot easier to explain where things happen. But what happens is, I have people coming up who want to take Route 9 from Glens Falls to Lake George. I'm like, no, it's not on Route 9. She said she took a side road. She started on Route 9, but when she gets to the action of this book, she's on a side road. And Round Pond is the only one that's on the left on that road. That's the only one it can be. So this picture has given people all kinds of headaches because they had to put it on these 2 pages in order to get this much I don't know, real estate on it. But in no, these days, maps are always north is up. And that's a modern enough convention that they weren't too worried about it when they made this sketch, but it's given me a lot of, oh, Matt, I live here. So anyway, she goes on her scooter, her beautiful scooter, and from Route 9 south, takes her left after Storytown, USA, goes to Paradise Beach, there's some motels there, and gets the job with a horrible jet. And the woman and the man say, well, you know, the people are coming to really close the hotel tomorrow. I'm gonna give you the keys, you just give them to the owner tomorrow. Okay. And she doesn't like them. She didn't like them at all, so she was glad to see them go and glad to have time to herself, which is the writing conceit that gives her, that makes her alone in the hotel, so that the bad guys can show up and try to assault her and burn down the hotel for the insurance money. Luckily, James Bond shows up. And it doesn't happen. Now there's, we got such a short time.
They can stay longer.
Thank you. So he was trying to be different, and I'm gonna say, we all know he was trying to be different. He makes James Bond kind of a screw up here too. And he messes up the rescue of Viv, and she has to tell him how to fix things. And eventually he does try and pull the bad guys. I can't tell you everything because we won't have any time for discussion if I do. And he arranges so that there's a reward money for capturing the bad guys, and she gets the reward money. Now, I've spent a lot of time, because it's very important to me, talking about how we know Ian Fleming was absolutely, definitely in the Glens Falls area. Think about this, next time you're walking right here on Glen Street, Ian Fleming was here, he was on Route 9, I love that. But I want to emphasize that he was not here in October. I'm sure, or at least he was not here in October overnight. He gave a beautiful description of what the maples look like. He said that the mountains in early October with the maples aflame, lighting up the mountains like shrapnel bursts. And that is so meaningful, especially if you've ever spent autumn any place but the Adirondacks. I mean, we love our maple trees, we absolutely do. But we don't understand how wonderful it is until we've been someplace else. I was an exchange student in Liverpool, and of course I love fall. So, you know, it got to be October and I was looking forward to the trees, and it got to be November, and I was like, well, maybe fall just happens later in England, I don't know. And then I realized that it was time for me to fly home for Christmas, and there had been no red. Everything just turned brown and fell. That was it. So Ian Fleming absolutely had to have been here in October to be that impressed by the trees. But one thing happens that tells me he definitely wasn't here for very long. Maybe he drove through on the way to someplace else. Right, we've got you know, climate change now, but still, anybody here have your heat on yet, or have had your heat on and turned it off? It's no shame. I remember my mother used to have to make a Halloween costume that would fit over my snowsuit. And I remember we would on occasion have a white Halloween. Oh, yeah. And you know, it didn't say, but we would have a white Halloween. And I remember, you know, we would start to wear the wool socks, you know, come about late September. I'm saying this because the bad guys, or one of the bad guys, his car is forced into rainy waters, okay, and able to somehow open the car door and swim out and come back to terrorize. No, he didn't. He died of hypothermia. He was weighted down by wet clothes and he died. There is no way in October In 1960, you fall into a lake and get out of the lake to terrorize people. It just doesn't happen. And I have Twitter, and I have mostly English followers on my James Bond Twitter for obvious reasons, because so many James Bond, fans are English. And every year for the past, I'm gonna say 7, I wanted to go out and go swimming in October, just so I can record my goosebumps and show the people in England, like, there's no way that's gonna happen. No, I'm too much of a wimp. I am not, no. I've lived here all my life, and I love to swim, but the latest I've ever been in the lake is October 15th, and that was just to show up. And that was to get in right away. So anyway, Ian Fleming was definitely in Glens Falls, and he was definitely around here, but he definitely did not swim or try to swim in Lake George in October. All right, so Ian Fleming, I'm ready to pass this around, this first edition. Oh my gosh, I have a first edition inspired, nothing. But also look at a picture of Ian Fleming, and some of you know the answer. If you don't know the answer, or if you do know the answer, don't tell. I want everybody to see a picture of Ian Fleming, and then I want you to tell me how old you think he is. And those of you who read it, don't cheat!
No, I'm not. I just want to get a picture. It doesn't say how old he is anyway.
Okay, I'm gonna take the other one away.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Oh, does it?
Look at your.
Yo, that one is the one that he died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me how old you think he is. Or don't tell me yet, let everybody skip it. Now, while you're looking at, everyone wants to go through and see the stuff about Lady George, and I don't blame you, I love that. Anyway, so I was so bothered by the fact that so many of us don't know that Ian Fleming spent time here in the Adirondacks, that I wrote an article for the New York Folklore Society about that. And I pretty much didn't worry about it after that. I wrote an article about Ian Fleming, I explained he had to have been here, I explained some of the things he did right, I explained what I really liked about this character, because she was so independent, she was so cool, she was so fun. And for a guy, Ian did a really good job of being in the brain of a woman in her early 20s. I was reading this when I was 17, going, yeah, that tracks, that's about right, that's about fair, that's about how I felt, in First Love. The book didn't do as well as he expected. People didn't like a James Bond book where he didn't show up until later. They didn't like a James Bond book where he was kind of a screw up. And they didn't like so much the Adirondack setting, not because the Adirondacks aren't beautiful, but because Ian had to make it different. All the James Bond books are like, oh, Istanbul's great, and Paris is great, and all this. So he had to purposely talk about things he didn't like in the Adirondacks, because Viv had to sound different from Bond. It couldn't sound like Bond again. So she had to describe things differently. And for a Bond book not to be talking about how beautiful the land was very hard for people to take. And that's one of the big reasons that it didn't do as well as expected. But, okay, who wants to guess how old he is? That picture? 60. Are we going to agree on 60?
51.
51?
70.
Well, there's a young one and an old one. I say 45 and 70.
45 and 70?
We'll go with 45.
Yeah, he's let me think. I think in that one he's about 49. Wow. He had a heart attack. He had a heart attack early, but now it turns out that what officially was his first heart attack probably wasn't his first heart attack. And he was told early on, you gotta knock it off with the cigarettes, so he cut it down.
And that's the thing, back in the 60s, people looked older than
Oh,
they
yeah.
like what we look like now.
Oh, yeah.
We
Because
look better, we take care of ourselves.
Yeah,
And we got better drugs and
Yeah, and we learned about sunscreen.
You're saying 49 in the old picture?
Well, this is
in this
one
one,
in the picture, yeah.
49?
Yeah.
Looks like 109.
Yeah, he does, yeah, it's really old.
10 words are, it's so hard.
He, once he realized he was terminally ill, he said, I will not waste my days trying to prolong them. Yeah. So, you know, go in. Anyway, I'm gonna pass this around because right here to here, Ian's talking about how he loves to visit Saratoga and how he loves to visit Lake George and how he likes to stay in motels, which is something you don't think about Ian Fleming, loving to stay in motels. So anyway, I wrote an article for New York State Folklore Society because I just had to get it out of my system. I went, okay, that's it. People need to know that Ian Fleming spent time in Lake George. So I wrote the article was published, and I went, okay, I never need to worry about that again. Then I got a Facebook message that said, hi, you know, I'm a publisher and agent in London, and I've read your writing and I think it's really good. I'm like, yeah, all right. So I closed the one window and I opened up another window. I'm like, well, dang, he is who he says he is. That's funny. So, and this guy whose name is Tom Cull, lovely man, wanted me to write articles about Ian Fleming, not necessarily in Lake George, but he just wanted me to write for him. And when somebody nice says, will you please write for me? The answer is yes, please. So I started writing more articles. I was getting more specific, talking about his health, talking about the art in the books. My undergraduate degree is in art history. And there's so much good art in Ian Fleming books, so that's something I wrote about. So one day I got this email from this guy, says, hi, you don't know me, but I'm this, you know, Hollywood producer and I'm interested in your work. And I'm like, you're all right. So I closed the one window and I opened up another, like, oh dang, he's telling the truth, he is who he says he is. And he wanted to meet with me because he wanted to see sights from Spy Who Loved Me, because he was from California. And he knew that he didn't know his way around here. Well, it happened that Cambridge, Black Hole Hollow Farm, which was a vacation site for Ian Fleming and was the site of one of his short stories, From a View to a Kill. This fantastic estate with, you know, $4 million. It was for sale. And this guy, the producer, he was going to take a tour of it. And I said, oh, you know, I didn't make a deal with him because I was not in a position to make a deal. I tried to be all cool though, and I'm like, oh, you know, can I come with you? And so we kind of made a deal where I would show him Spy Who Loved Me sites, and he would show me where Ian Fleming went on vacation. I got to see Ian Fleming's vacation bedroom. I got to see where Ian had done some writing, where Roald Dahl had done some writing as well, because they remained friends. And I also got to meet a woman who was the inspiration for the real Solange. There's a Solange in the James Bond movies, but also in the James Bond books. So I got to meet the one who was the real Solange.
Yes.
And she had the one house in Cambridge and the other house on Park Avenue. And she said she wanted to talk to me too. Well, I'm a widow. I have one child. And I have the kind of job you just can't leave because somebody says so. And I said, well, you know, I'm really sorry, ma'am. I don't have the kind of job I can leave all the time. You know, could you visit with me when you're up in Cambridge? And she said, well, you know, because she's like 90. I'm not going to be up there for a while, blah, blah, blah. Sorry. So then she called me again and she said, you know, can you come and see me, blah, blah, blah. I said, I don't know the job right with me all the time. So I called my brother and I said, why don't these people understand I don't have the kind of job I can just leave? And my brother's the most deadpan person in the world. He just said, you were invited to a Park Avenue apartment twice and you said no. I said, thank you. And I want to talk to my boss. And she said, you were invited to a Park Avenue apartment twice and you said no. So she made her arrangements so that I could take the time off. And I went into the Park Avenue apartment trying to look cool, trying to get information on Ian Fleming. And she gave me so much information on Ian Fleming, it's going to have to go in a different talk. But we can confirm he was weird. But what was wonderful was talking to somebody who had actually known him. And I could say, like, did he really have a champagne taste in the books? Or was that just for the books, you know? And apparently he did have a champagne taste, but he was a terrible cook. And he didn't like horses, which is why there are so few horses in James Bond books. And it was really interesting to talk to somebody. You think about it, is James Bond ever on a horse? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's what they were known for.
Yeah. It's a weird world. Oh, which reminds me, Diamonds Are Forever has a scene in Saratoga.
I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah, we're not gonna have enough time, unfortunately, to talk about that one. But they have a scene in the mud baths. And the mud bath experience is very well described in here. I was able to talk to somebody who was a mud bath attendant, who was also an incredibly old.
Yeah.
But she, lovely lady. Anyway, so I decided it would be fun to do the trip on a scooter. And I was able to get a vintage looking scooter. This is a 1980s scooter. It's not a 1960s scooter, but it looks pretty old. And I wish I could tell you a wonderful story about how I obtained the scooter, but it was pretty much saying to one of my coworkers, I wish I could get a scooter. Oh, my dad's got two. Would he rent me one? No, I'm sure he could just have it. So I didn't even have to rent it or anything. It was that simple. And here I am on my scooter. And I had to drive it north first to the Canadian border. And this was at the height of COVID, so the border was closed. But it was the perfect activity for the height of COVID because I was outside and I was by myself. And, you know, I wasn't going to stop a lot anyway. And one other reason that I know that Ian Fleming absolutely did not take that trip himself is that, you know, she's talking about the open road and how great it is. And the open road is great. I don't know if I'll ever have as much fun as Chow. Oh no. But it was so unbelievably cold, even at 35 miles an hour. I mean, this is the, I'll pass this around too. This is the exact jacket I was wearing with a turtleneck and a wool jumper. And I was still like,
Was it in October?
I went in August. And it was still, well, the one thing is I wanted to go pretty early. I wanted to start early in the morning because you don't know who's going to be hostile with you. I bike a lot and I rollerblade a lot. And, you know, I've had people throw things at me. I've had cars try to run me off the road, you know, and I didn't know if people were going to respond to a scooter the way that they respond to me on a bike. I'm a super conscientious biker, you know, and people still get very hostile to me. So I did try to go very early when I was, when I got on the road, and that's one of the reasons I got very cold. Anyway, so going down the road was fantastic, and I can tell you categorically,
It's heavy though.
it's
Yeah.
heavy. When you're going 35 miles an hour, it gets super cold.
Yeah.
And
Is it leather?
this is real leather, yes. This, I wish I could tell you where it really came from, but I'm sure it was pretty shady. And I was at this restaurant with this guy named Tony.
Was that his real name?
I'm not telling you, but Tony said this guy came in and he couldn't pay his bill, so he gave me this. I'm like, thanks, Tony.
It's all part of the plot.
It just
right?
gets better and better,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
So I had to drive north before I drove south, but I stopped at Natural Stone Bridge and Caves. I gave them a copy of the book because Natural Stone Bridge and Caves is on the book cover, which is absolutely marvelous. And pretty much I stopped everywhere that Viv could have possibly stopped between Montreal and Lake George. Every place that's still open, I visited, and a couple places that weren't open yet just because they were fun. But stopping every chance I absolutely could stop, it still only took me a week. So, and keeping in mind, I was doing in August where more would be open, in October, there's way less open. Which
Although
they
you
just,
weren't running into the kind of traffic that was on Route 9 before.
right, because everything's been diverted to the north, right?
Yeah.
So that gives and takes at the same time.
Yeah.
Because everything's been diverted to the north way, so I'm not running into the traffic. And also, Route 9 has become such a ghost town that there are a lot of places that are still owned by the same families. There are a lot of restaurants that are still owned by the same families, there are still some hotels with the same family. I'm almost at the end, so I'm just gonna tell you about two of my favorite things about taking my scooter, my Bartlett scooter down from Montreal. This was 2021, which now we can barely remember, but that was the season where it was raining. And the type of hotels that I was trying to stay at, the little family-owned hotels, they don't have, they tend not to have internet ways to sign up. And they tend not to give your money back if you're gonna cancel, because they really can't afford to keep their family business, they cannot give your money back. So I was installing on making my reservations because I didn't want to lose the money of. So I took a recon by car first because I wanted to know where the places to stay were, also because I had to find out where all the gas stations were, because the scooter only has a 1 gallon tank. So I had to know ahead of time when I was gonna be able to stop the thing, so I took a recon by car. And on the way up, I found this wonderful place to stay, the Shamrock Inn. You've got to go. The lady's wonderful. It's halfway up, it's just a little north of Plattsburgh. Woman who's a fantastic artist. The place has been in business since 1938, and a lot of the 1930s stuff is still there. Trying to stay places that Viv could have really possibly stayed. As I found out for one night, and for the next night, I couldn't find anything. I would pull over in my little car, and I stop at every single hotel. Do you have a place for next Saturday? No, you should have called 2 months ago. It's happened again and again and again. I got really, really discouraged. I went into this place called Halfway House, which is in Elizabethtown. And I knew I couldn't find a place to stay. At this point, I was like, okay, not gonna find a place to stay. I'm gonna pump the guy for campgrounds or something. But it was a restaurant too, so we sat down, ordered some soup, and I heard the guy at the port saying, "No, we're talking on his cell phone saying we're full. He came to see how things are, can I get you anything?" And I channeled Roger Moore and I said, "Information speaking." I need a place to stay next Saturday. He says, "I got a hotel." I said, "No, I just heard you telling somebody you're full. Like, I don't mind tenting. I just need a place to stay next Saturday. It doesn't have to be fancy." He says, "You don't mind tenting?" Yeah. I said, "Oh, just park your scooter and back at a hotel. Got a nice spot by the river." I'm like, am I going to be murdered? Or is this going to be the coolest thing that's ever happened? It was the coolest thing that ever happened. He had, for some reason, mowed the grass in a huge field by the Boquet River, which is a fly fishing river, so it's not very deep, but I'm 5'2", so it's deep enough for me to swim. And I was able to put my little toy tent, which is all I could fit in the scooter, in the back of the scooter, and then put it by the river. And as the sun set, the bumblebees were happening, and a hummingbird visited, and the river was bubbling. And as the sun went down, the planet Venus was right over my tent. And it was just the coolest thing that had ever happened. That is my time. I am so sorry I can't tell you more this time. So